first heard about Glasper when he was at the New School. He was beginning to incorporate a lot of the elements that he's experimented with in his Robert Glasper experiment. Glasper and those guys, not only did they bring a youth element to it, but they brought a hip-hop element, an element of bringing hip-hop and jazz together. Then he started doing the trio, and then he went into the experiment. He made a recording. I think it was a trio. I don't have it, but he made his first record was with that label, that Spanish label, Fresh Sound. Yeah, his first record was with that label, and I believe it was a trio record. And it began to evolve his trio thing. And then he signed with Blue Note. And his trio, even though it was acoustic piano, bass, and drums, but then he also began incorporating keyboards into that. Even though it was that kind of atmosphere, there was still this feeling that he was doing something new in terms of incorporating those hip-hop elements, even in what was largely an acoustic piano setting. We had that kind of acid jazz thing happening in the late 90s, early 2000s, which hinted at that, but which wasn't engaging hip-hop in the kind of authoritative way that he has done with collaborators like Mos Def. I think Glasper has been successful in part because he has respect from both camps. He's known as the jazz guy, and he talked about that at the Blue Note 75th anniversary panel discussion at Monterey. He talked about the fact that among the Mos Defs and Commons and other folks from that world that he is affiliated with and collaborated with, he's known as the jazz guy. And then, of course, from the jazz side, particularly his generation of straight jazz players, has great respect for what he brings from that perspective too. So I think in a lot of ways, personality and disposition rules these kinds of impressions that people have. And Robert Glasper is a very personable cat, and he has a great sense of humor, which comes through. And speaking of humor, you should meet his young son. He's a trip. But Glasper, I think his disposition and the fact that he is able to move comfortably between those two worlds, I think that has played a big role in his acceptance on both sides. Because sometimes, when jazz artists want to explore a certain, what we often refer to as pop element in their music, they come off as tourists. And Glasper never does. Glasper always seems like, well, he knows where he's at. He has these affiliations and these relationships. He knows what he's doing here. And on the other hand, if you need him to play all blues, he can do that too. You know what I'm saying? Or if you need all the things you are, he's well versed in that. And he brings that gospel perspective to the music as well, that I think is also very attractive on both sides of that coin. The whole Black Radio series, which is now at 2 parts, that I see that as almost a fuller manifestation of what he was hinting at before with the trio and then with the experiment. And it's interesting, he never says, well, this is jazz, so he's not necessarily perpetrating. So to some of us who are viewed as hardcore purists, we have this sense of people perpetrating. Like the general public thinks of what they do as jazz, but we diehards, we don't consider what they're doing as jazz. But you have to divorce yourself from that attitude and look at what he's doing as being almost another stream in and of itself. with a lot of jazz elements, but also with a lot of elements that appeal to a broader audience. And if you take an ecumenical approach to how you view what he's doing, you recognize the fact that here's someone who can bring some of the uninitiated into the fold. I wouldn't say he's alone in that area. I would just say he's by far the most successful in that area. No, but I wouldn't necessarily say he was alone, because he's part of a generation that grew up on hip hop. You know, that was the that's the music of their day. And you know, but it's interesting to see the reaction of people like my daughter, for example. My daughter has a good ear for music. She's a major hip hop fan, a variety of different the more creative strains of hip hop, and she's nuts about Glasper. You know, totally into what he's doing, and you know, so there again is another aspect of what we just talked about, the sense that, okay, well, perhaps some of this will transfer over to the development of an interest in real jazz.